Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. I found a few notes to play on my xylophone to welcome you to the broadcast. Today we're going to be talking about January 6th. It's the 2-year anniversary of that tragic and predictable and yet also surprising and violent event in which various seditionists sought to overthrow American democracy. I'm trying not to be chipper about it, but I am chipper that they lost. We're also going to talk about Matt Schlapp and the credible accusation that he fondled a staff member of Herschel Walker's Senate campaign as he was assigned to drive Herschel home. And also the ongoing speaker vote, which showcases Republican dysfunction, incoherence, lack of principle, and low-level commitment to helping American governance function. And then the last one is a great one. Dems create jobs, not chaos. So yes, I'm so pleased that somebody's come up with a positive hashtag that is trending at number 3 in the United States last time I looked, because it does highlight the positive side of that story. Yes, House Republicans are showcasing their infinite capacity for chaos and dysfunction, and their appetite for notoriety over principled hard work, the hard work of making informed decisions about how to best meet the needs of Americans and citizens and residents of the United States. So the reason why I've got General Flynn up there is because his account has been restored to Twitter by Elon Musk on the anniversary of the attempted coup that General Flynn was likely key in orchestrating behind the scenes. So this is the post I wanted to touch on first. A famous Twitter account, Ron Filipowski, I believe he was a former attorney advisor to he's a former federal prosecutor and a Republican. He's now a defense attorney and a Democrat. So someone who's made a big philosophical turnaround that has big consequences in his life. But one of the things he does as a service to pro-democracy activists on Twitter is he showcases what's up with the right wing and Republicans. Those two heavily overlapping Venn circles. So let's see. In the last 24 hours, he notes that Rudy Giuliani has been sued for sexual harassment. A male staffer for Herschel Walker has noted that he was groped by Matt Schlapp without his consent. Brian Kilmeade from Fox News has used the term insurrectionist to refer to the Freedom Caucus, the 20 holdout House Republicans. Actually, no, I don't know if it's entirely the 20. But yes, it's definitely a section of the holdout Republicans who are refusing to vote for the most popular Republican candidate for the position of Speaker. Sean Hannity, also of Fox, has attacked Lauren Boebert. I haven't heard about that. That's interesting. Ali Alexander has referred to Marjorie Taylor Greene as a whore and threatened to expose evidence of a crime to the police in Georgia. Kevin McCarthy's failed his 11th vote, I believe, but we're probably up to more by now. Nancy Mace, a Republican congressperson, has called Matt Gaetz a fraud. And Laura Loomer, a right-wing activist who also happens to be Jewish, calls Marjorie Taylor Greene Benedict Arnold. Well, we do love to see the dysfunction of the Republican Party and the right-wing movement bubble to the surface so prominently for the purposes of educating unaware members of the public. Politics is about coalition building. Political outcomes occur through marginal shifts, and any increase in awareness of how racism isn't just a social problem we decry because it victimizes people. Racism is a tool used to take advantage of people. racism creates mental weakness. And yes, that comports with the common saying about Republicans, which is that every accusation is a confession, an inadvertent confession. Have a look. Matt Schlapp, the man credibly accused by someone who made a contemporaneous recording of their experience a few hours after the alleged sexual assault happened, which they have shared with NBC News today. Matt Schlapp, the alleged fondler of an anonymous Herschel Walker staffer, he and his wife, Mercedes Schlapp, have been enthusiastic facilitators of rabidly anti-gay propaganda at the conservative conferences, CPAC. So someone's already memed it with Mercedes having a voice caption saying, "I hate being around gay people," and her husband accused of, I should say, fondling a man. Even though I've been saying this, Herschel Walker staffer anonymous is anonymous, I haven't highlighted that they are a man. They were specific in saying that the part of their anatomy that was fondled was their leg and their penis. So they're definitely a man. Matt Schlapp stands accused of homosexual targeted sexual harassment. So that's a potent meme. And that's General Flynn's account restored, but that does also mean that more evidence will be available to Jack Smith, the special prosecutor investigating Donald Trump and allies for the coordinated effort to overthrow self-governance, to overthrow governance by the people, for the people, in favor of installing an unelected Donald Trump for a second term. All right. I'm also looking at Republican Representative Gosar, who is extremely right-wing, and he's suggested that Zelensky, unsurprisingly, has rejected peace and says it is immoral to fund this war. It's not so much a war as an ongoing invasion from Russia and a concerted effort to defend and protect the people of Ukraine and the nation and the culture of Ukraine from that immoral invasion. So America hasn't so much as funded a war. America has helped turn over some of their assets, their military assets that were a very tiny portion of their massive military assets that were trending towards obsolescence, to the Ukrainian people so that they can use them rather than have those assets rust and age out of cutting edge excellence. America invests an extraordinary amount of money in having excellent military assets. So it's a very good use of those obsolescing assets to turn them over to an American ally. And Ukraine is an allied nation to the United States. So yes, unsurprisingly, Paul Gosar is repeating a Kremlin narrative. There would seem to be a lot of Republicans that have very strong overlapping interests with anti-democracy, despotic Kremlin Putin folk. Vladimir Putin is a despot. He doesn't hold legitimate elections. He holds performative elections in which his political opponents are either murdered, poisoned, unexpectedly fall from windows, or put in jail. And as the Sergei Magnitsky case revealed, he's also not above jailing associates of American or British business people who seek to do business in Russia, just as a way of concealing his own skimming off of profits. So Sergei Magnitsky was apparently helping to uncover a scheme in which a false tax return claim was filed, and millions of dollars were paid for this tax return that wasn't actually legitimately submitted by the business person whose name was on the forms. So those millions of dollars paid for the tax return were actually paid to someone whose bank accounts are available for Vladimir Putin to use as his own. So basically, uncovering theft from the Russian people by Vladimir Putin landed Sergei Magnitsky in jail, and he was frequently beaten and untreated for a medical condition that developed subsequently. And so following a final beating, he died in a Russian prison. And Bill Browder is the UK-US, he's lived in both countries, UK-US businessman Bill Browder, who fought for recognition of Sergei Magnitsky's integrity in refusing to capitulate to Putin and just say, sure, I haven't uncovered evidence of a crime. In fact, I committed the crimes, and Bill Browder committed crimes, not Vladimir Putin. So that's why so many countries have a Magnitsky Act, which are typically pieces of legislation written to sanction those in Putin's government, Vladimir Putin himself, who participate in the lawless punishment of people who uncover crime. The fact that there's ostensibly rule of law in Russia, but really there are some powerful people who will just get you arrested and beaten if you find evidence that of their wrongdoing. So we have Christopher and August. Hello. And Christopher's, and Bob here's, hello, Bob. If McCarthy promised the power of a vote of confidence over the Speaker of the House by a single member, won't they misuse that power ASAP? Asked Christopher. Why, yes, Christopher. His initial offer had been to allow for 5 people. If 5 members instituted a vote of no confidence in the Speaker, then that was the initial offer. Then it went down to 1. If 1 member of the House of Congress institutes a no confidence vote, they could have a vote and depose McCarthy as Speaker. It definitely would destabilize the functioning of the House of Representatives. But McCarthy is so desperate, he agreed to that. He's so desperate to get the outstanding votes he needs to reach 218, which is the number you need to attain a majority of votes if all members are present on the House floor. And the thing is, Republicans are happy with that. What are their goals in office? What are their collective goals as part of the American system of governance? It's not to facilitate smooth governance. It's to obstruct and block and hopefully create as much economic recession conditions as possible in order to damage Joe Biden's reputation and President Biden's reputation and the reputation of the Democratic Party. So artificially induce economic problems for Americans so that they can enhance the false story they tell of Republican financial competence and Democratic and bad outcomes associated with Democrats in office. So they create those bad outcomes where, however possible, there are some Republicans who are a little more responsible than others, and they don't want that level of naked dysfunction. They don't have confidence that the media will help cover up their role in creating such dysfunction. But the more out there Republicans, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, etc., they are pushing ahead with, I'm not going to say commendable fearlessness, because I don't commend that level of impulsive, short-sighted behavior, but it's long-sighted if you consider the degree of selfishness in which they operate. They're pushing forward with confidence to say, we believe that the media will not adequately convey to the public that it's our fault for creating an ungovernable element of Congress. the House of Representatives is only half of Congress, but you need things to pass both the Senate and the House of Representatives in order for President Biden to sign them as pieces of legislation. They know that such a significant component of the American public live under a bubble of concerted right-wing propaganda, that they don't support legislation that helps Americans. So the child tax credit, which helped so many families stay out of poverty, the Infrastructure Act, which helped direct funds towards America's pressing infrastructure needs, crumbling bridges and roads that need repair and expansion, etc. There's so many who live under that bubble of conservative media who are always told that investment and expenditure is bad. So they're able to sustain those contradictory beliefs because they're just force-fed, powerful mantras. Democrats spend, and then that causes the problem. They'll simultaneously complain about bridges that need repairs. They'll simultaneously complain if their hospitals close, if their Republican governing officials withhold funds from things they need. They won't appreciate that the Biden administration has tried to direct funds to fix those problems, but those funds have met an obstacle sometimes at the state level, and state governance blocks Medicaid expansion and blocks money from expanding water infrastructure, much needed water infrastructure in Mississippi. They don't hear that. They hear repeated mantras that are like fascist propaganda because they're so antithetical to truth. It's so profoundly untruthful to say all government expenditure is bad, all government is bad, and while simultaneously complaining that the government is incompetent and letting you down because bridges are crumbling and schools should be of higher standards. Somebody pointed out on Twitter the other day what a massive industry it is for those who are advocating for school vouchers and charter schools to become mainstream. That is an industry with huge amounts of money. Lots of people have children, and stripping public schools of funding in order to put the funding into vouchers that parents can then spend where they will at a charter school or at a public school is stripping taxpayer funds, taking away taxpayer funds from public schools that are bound by the Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision that says you can't have segregated schools. So private schools and charter schools can discriminate. You're making a match between taxpayer funds and discriminatory practices whereby children with disabilities aren't catered to. You can fail to have individual education plans for students. You can betray American children in a plethora of different ways if you run a charter school. You can exclude Black or brown students, you can exclude students with disabilities, or you can include them and then find ways to deny them equivalent resources to others, or to deny them an education that's undergirded by principles of equality of offering. Christopher has a question. Is it too far-fetched to think that they would use that power to bring Trump into the House to protect him? At this point, it seems, yes, it's too far-fetched, only because Matt Gaetz has already nominated Trump, I think, 3 times to be Speaker of the House, and he's only garnered that 1 vote from Matt Gaetz, making Trump look like a figure of ridicule, really, to only have 1 vote. Because even Kevin McCarthy's been mustering 202 votes in all of the 11 or 12 votes that he's now lost for the Speaker. Hakeem Jeffries has consistently been awarded 212 votes because the Democrats have been concerted and unified, which is nice. the GOP, it's like hard to understand how they're even affecting these decisions when they don't have a speaker. And because there's no speaker of the House, nobody's been sworn in. But evidently they must have sway with some of the people who just consistently work in office who aren't elected officials. The Republicans are like, well, we have the majority, so it's not official yet. Nobody's been sworn in yet. We don't have a speaker, but let us get away with doing these things. Please take down Trump's taxes off the House Ways and Means Committee website. Please remove the magnometers, which are the machines that help scan for guns before people can enter the House of Representatives chamber, which is a terrible thing to have done just before January the 6th. But anyway, it's a thing. They're doing these things. I've already processed a lot of my grief that Democrats lost the House majority after the midterm elections. I've learnt to try and focus on my gratitude that the Democrats retained and expanded their majority in the Senate. Yay. And to at least accept that it was only a thin majority that the Republicans won in the House. But gosh damn, white voters and white adjacent voters who voted for Republicans, even after the events of the last 2 years, given that Republicans have demonstrated their commitment to authoritarianism, demonstrated their commitment to sabotaging and undermining governance by the people. Bob says he sent a message, but it says the moderator is checking it. Oh, is that on Twitch? Interesting. I didn't know I had any moderators on Twitch. I have one, I think, called Peter Parker. I didn't know he was still there, but maybe there's somebody else operating through Twitch to check messages. What I might do is also try and log into Twitter on my phone, and then I'll be able to see anybody who comments. I have to look up my own. It was about Santos and a hand signal. Oh, good point, Bob. We will scroll to that. I have some of that in my saved bookmarked things. Oh, I'll also note that Ashley Babbitt's brother was convicted of a hate crime in November of 2022. So not less than 2 months ago. I'll expand it so that I can see what exactly it was. Ashley Babbitt's brother went up to a Latino official, someone who was diverting traffic near an intersection. What's an SDG&E worker? Streets development. Anyway, an SDG&E worker who was diverting traffic near the intersection of Mendocino Boulevard and Voltaire Street was slapped by Ashley Babbitt's brother, Withoft. They have different surnames because presumably Ashley Babbitt acquired her surname when she married. And he told the victim after slapping him to talk. Actually, I don't know if it was a him or a her. After slapping the worker, Withoft told the victim to talk in English, you expletive migrant, and go back to your country. Expletive. Authorities said he faces up to a year in jail, 1 year of probation, and a $1,000 fine in the hate crime attack. He is scheduled to be sentenced on December the 13th, so he should already be sentenced at this point. That's good. And Withoft has had at least 2 other run-ins with authorities. In 2016, he was convicted of vandalizing a 71-year-old Latino man's truck in Lakeside. And then also in January 2022, he faced new criminal charges after getting into an altercation with another man who he allegedly knocked to the ground and stomped on his phone after becoming angry with the victim for blocking a sidewalk with his vehicle. At the time, the victim was helping a disabled friend out of the car. So I think that's interesting. So the people this man has attacked have been Latino and someone assisting a disabled person. So there's a level of impatience and entitlement that I think really speaks to the character of a lot of those who have allied themselves with Trump and the Republican Party. Yes. And George Santos, the recently elected Republican congressman, represents a New York district on Long Island, which has a lot of Jewish people, and who pretended to be Jewish himself and pretended to be the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. And as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors myself, in actuality, I found it so extremely offensive and painful that he would have made that up as a lie to promote himself to voters. But that man, that stolen Holocaust connection person, George Santos, who's also a wanted criminal in Brazil alleged check fraud, for stealing checkbooks from clients of his mother, who was a nurse at that time, a home nurse. George Santos was photographed today voting for Kevin McCarthy with one hand and making a white supremacist gesture with the other hand. Guess we can find it by scrolling. It's hard because I don't want to see the picture again, but I will. I will, because we look at these unpleasant things to... Here we go. All right, these are all of my bookmarks. Newly elected freshman Republican George Santos makes white power gesture as he casts his vote for House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. Make it a bit bigger. Oh, and Ashley Babbitt's mum was arrested today. So her brother was arrested and was charged on December the 13th. Here is George Santos making a white power signal. For them, it might not even, he's not white himself. He's white adjacent. He's allied himself with white supremacists. What you could say really is their white supremacy is full of contrarian energy. So they would almost tell you that the gesture was an anti-woke gesture. And if you said, what's wokeism? They might end up saying something about critical race theory to you, because their understanding is that there are people who want to enhance our collective understanding of racial conflict in the United States, of the various white riots that have come about when people have burned Black businesses and Black homes as a sort of collective response to Black success. So that a racist belief that Black people can't succeed suffers so much cognitive dissonance when Black people do succeed and thrive and have businesses and wealth and prosperity and notoriety for excellence, is that some people are then much more easily triggered into violence, into, we heard a rumor that somebody was assaulted or something happened. We are now going to attack any Black people that we can see, and we're going to amplify conflict. And we're going to have a riot, a very destructive riot. That there have been a plethora of such white riots from white people picking fights and burning Black businesses and Black homes and Black churches and Black schools out of a misdirected... Is it snowing? Or is it raining? I think it's snowing. Maybe just raining. But they were the raindrops were looking a little snowflakey. All right. So yes, I've had this picture of this white supremacist up for long enough. I will take it down. He is a bad person who not only is very famous for lying to an extraordinary level, and then Republicans refusing to bar him from being sworn in. They could kick him out of the party. They could do something, and they chose not to because they want his vote. And they want his presence to to add to their razor-thin majority in the House. And so for that reason, they're not kicking out someone who has been exposed as having a completely fabricated resume, a completely fabricated work history, racial and cultural history, a completely fabricated history of owning properties when he's been evicted for non-payment of rent multiple times. He's staying with his sister who hasn't paid rent for a year, who's also under an eviction notice, although she hasn't officially been evicted yet. And he was complaining on Twitter. He was using social media to pretend that, how dare there be these eviction moratoriums? It's hurting families like mine that aren't getting rent on all these properties we own, when in actuality, he was one of the people not paying rent and his family didn't own any properties. And he himself was evicted and his sister was under notice of eviction for a year. She did not pay rent for a year. Imagine being the kind of landlord with George Santos's sister as a tenant. Bob is noting that the new COVID strain, what are they calling it? The Kraken, colloquially, high degree of immune evasion, which also renders the vaccines less effective, highly transmissible, is definitely present in a lot of wastewater in the New England region. So in Massachusetts, where I am, I'm concerned. I don't like it, and I'm thinking of getting my children to wear masks at school again, but it'll be hard for them because it's no longer mandated, and it's hard to do things that is different to what your peers are doing. Yes. So this is video of the moment of silence that the members of the House, and I'll play it because we can share the moment of silence. The members of the House gathered on the steps of the US Capitol for a moment of silence for the 140 officers who were seriously injured on January the 6th, 2 years ago. So these officers who were doing their job, who were protecting the Capitol from an invading mob of people who called them traitors, who screamed at them, who used weapons that were not only their hands, but were things like sharpened spear tips that were concealed by having flags added to them. People brought bear spray. People brought things to use as weapons against police officers and the National Guard, if they'd been deployed in time, they were going to push through any opposition they could in defense of Trump to try and defend him from the consequences of losing an election. They were trying to advance his agenda of pretending that the election was stolen and therefore saying, I won by millions of votes, was Trump's claim. If you count just to the legal votes, then I won by a lot, he said. All right, let's have a listen.
In a 142nd moment of silence, an acknowledgement of the 140 officers who were seriously injured defending the Capitol on January 6th, 2021.
Okay, so that was
moment of silence.
That was a moment of silence for the officers injured during the attack on the Capitol. All right. What else is trending? How is the speaker vote going? Let me just make myself bigger for a second so I can scroll through without having to hurt anybody's eyes. Oh, we can look briefly at a protest. There is a protest and a counter protest. I think people protesting the imprisoned January the 6th insurrectionists are there with American flags, and the counter protesters are yelling, insurrectionists losers.
Insurrectionists losers! Insurrectionists losers! Insurrectionists losers! Insurrectionists losers! Insurrectionists losers!
They appear to be young. Look, I'm grateful for young people. If it wasn't for the turnout of Gen Z, there would have been a Republican red wave. Just people going, oh, I pay more for groceries. I'll choose to reflexively blame Democrats in the way that the media is telling me I already do, as if it's a fait accompli and they just have to report on it, rather than question it and say, oh, look, there's a war in Ukraine instigated by Trump ally Vladimir Putin, Trump friend, Trump, the person Trump idolized and accepted illicit help from in the 2016 election. Vladimir Putin, emboldened by Trump's friendship, Trump's adoration, and Trump's ability to skirt legal consequences for his voluminous crimes, including money laundering. He did suffer some legal consequences for money laundering. Let me see. I think he had to pay just a fine, though. Trump, guilty money laundering casino. It was FinCEN fined the Trump Taj Mahal Casino Resort $10 million. That criminal court case was settled. And FinCEN stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So there's a $10 million civil money penalty against Trump Taj Mahal Casino Resort for willful and repeated violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, BSA. In addition to the civil money penalty, the casino is required to conduct periodic external audits to examine its anti-money laundering BSA compliance program and to provide those audit reports to FinCEN and the casino's board of directors. So this, I'm looking at something from 2015, and doesn't it feel like a dereliction of duty on the part of the media that this $10 million fine for a settled case in which Trump's like, okay, yes, we didn't pick up on this money laundering. FinCEN director said they admitted several willful BSA violations, including violations of anti-money laundering program requirements, reporting obligations, and record-keeping requirements. Trump Taj Mahal has a long history of prior repeated BSA violations, cited by examiners dating back to 2003. Additionally, in 1998, FinCEN assessed a $477,000 civil money penalty against Trump Taj Mahal for currency transaction reported violations. So these are civil fines, but they're fines for a failure to report on criminal behavior. Trump Taj Mahal admitted that it failed to implement and maintain an effective anti-money laundering program, failed to report suspicious transactions, failed to properly file required currency transaction reports, and failed to keep appropriate records as required by the Bank Secrecy Act. Notably, Trump Taj Mahal had ample notice of these deficiencies, as many of the violations from 2012 and 2010 were discovered in previous examinations. Imagine if that paragraph had been read out loud repeatedly in the mainstream media, in the same way as Hillary Clinton potentially having talked about classified matters, which turns out she didn't. There were no classified emails. There was a retrospectively added small c in the text of an email, a couple of emails, and she was not found guilty of any wrongdoing. Imagine if the media had focused on that as if it was a scandal, that Trump's businesses had repeat notifications that they were facilitating crime. Because this failure to adhere to reporting, it's not like, oh yes, I didn't tie my shoelaces correctly and I got a notices about it, but I just have a habit of not tying my shoelaces. This was failure to comply with legislation. The legislation doesn't have a very evocative title, the Bank Secrecy Act. It just sounds like you want to keep secrets. It's an anti-criminal law to say, don't help criminals get away with money laundering. A casino lends itself to money laundering, that criminals can come in and instead of having banknotes stolen from the bank with numbers that can be traced, we'll just gamble with it, get some more money back. Sure, we've lost some, but the new notes we get don't have these traceable numbers, so we can more easily get away with our crime. Casinos can help criminals, but there's legislation that's supposed to say reduce the potential for criminals to facilitate their criminal activity through your casino. And the Trump organization was warned about it. Trump Taj Mahal had repeat pattern of infringements, and they still continued to do it until they received a $10 million fine, and they probably still continued to do it after that until the time that the casino was closed. So, unbelievable dereliction of duty on the part of the media, a brand of white patriarchal privileging to say, oh, we're in favor of questioning whether the white lady who's part of the Democratic Party that is currently associated with being friends to the interests of Black Americans. I mean, prior to 1963, the Democrats were the party associated with being a haven for the interests of racist people, for perpetuating racial injustice in favor of white people. But after LBJ caved to the articulate, concerted, persevering demands of civil rights activists and signed the Civil Rights Act in 1963, then the Democratic Party became the party associated with justice, with racial justice. And so, yes, it's a relatively new historical development since 1963 that the Democratic Party is the party of Black allyship. And they are punished for that by the media, which focuses on alleged crimes of the white woman leading the Democratic Party in 2016, because it was a new crime, in favor of going back and looking at this pattern of repeat criminal activity, of $10 million fines for Trump's Taj Mahal business for failing to uphold a law meant to prevent criminal activity, to prevent criminals from getting away with murder, with drug dealing, with sex trafficking, all of the things, bank robbery, all of the things that criminals do that then require them to launder their money, to launder the proceeds of their crime so that it becomes untraceable, so that the numbers on the money aren't a trail that the FBI can follow. So irritating. Okay, Bob said, could you imagine if the media didn't have on climate deniers at the same time as they had on a scientist? That would be nice. The Republican Party is the whataboutism party. Yes. Oh, I keep having Flynn's thing up there. Let's get rid of that. All right. So we've heard the protesters shout insurrectionist losers. They're telling a story. And yes, as you referred to before, Bob, the majority in the House, that's now Republican majority, they've removed Trump's taxes from the Ways and Means website. They've taken down the entire website for the Select Committee on January 6th. They've eliminated the word Labor from the name of the House. Is it Education and Labor Committee? All the while creating chaos and spectacle on the House floor. Someone says, under whose authority? No one is in charge yet. Well, exactly. There's some clearly Republican complicit, non-elected people. The photographer who took this photograph 2 years ago is on Twitter. Reuters senior photographer based in Washington, D.C. Her name is Leah Millis. 2 years ago, I took this photo, January the 6th, 5:04 p.m. I took this photo of law enforcement using flashbang grenades and tear gas on a violent mob trying to break into the US Capitol. It was hour 4 in my gas mask, helmet, and bulletproof vest, photographing hand-to-hand combat between police and US citizens. I arrived at the east side of the Capitol a little after 11 a.m., where a crowd was already gathering. They were fired up, yelling at lawmakers and anyone they could see entering the building. People were especially hostile towards press, yelling and flipping us off. There's an elderly lady dressed as Lady Liberty. She's got a wig on, a crown, a torch. She's got some attire to cosplay as Lady Liberty. A colleague sent us a group text alerting us that a crowd had broken through barricades on the west side of the building. So I ran over with 2 other journalists. First thing I did was put on my gas mask and helmet. It became fairly clear that the thin line of police holding back the violent crowd was not going to be able to hold them. I have heard figures that it was like 40-1 in terms of numbers for insurrectionists versus police officers. There were occasional tear gas and flashbangs, but not enough to deter so many people. I heard the entire crowd yelling, "Heave ho." I'll make this bigger because these photos are important. I heard the entire crowd yelling, "Heave ho," and realized they were about to break into the door on the level above me. I had avoided going up there for fear of no easy exit and getting trampled or attacked. So I climbed the inauguration scaffolding to get a better view. At this point, it was about 4 p.m. I had very little cell phone service and did not find out until now that people had breached the building. I texted a colleague I knew was inside asking if they were okay. They just responded they had been attacked. I stood up there for about an hour watching, photographing the crowd as they passed objects to the door and fought viciously with the police who were trying to keep them at bay. People broke nearby windows, climbed in and out, removed furniture. Oh, look at this. By about 4:50 p.m., reinforcements had arrived. They began using tear gas and flashbangs. I took a few wide frames to capture the scene before climbing down. I often think about that day, mostly about how lucky we were that more people were not killed or maimed. Oh, and she's made a video about it as well, called Vimeo Behind the Lens, January the 6th. So it must have been terrifying. Somebody went on a date with a New York Times journalist called Matthew Rosenberg, and it is snowing. It's very definitely snowing now. That's exciting. Wow, beautiful. Bob Christopher's on the phone. That's totally fine. Bob says the US media is letting all of America down. He's watching a little news from Sky News, and they actually cover many more subjects from around the world. Yes, the media in the United States often acts as if America is the only significant country in the world, and should just be perpetually the main point of focus, when we all share the world, and things that happen in other areas of the world are of interest and concern to us. Well, it provides more opportunity to be really repetitive with certain unchallenged dogma that everybody who is concerned about crime or inflation necessarily votes Republicans, when actually that's an irrational thing to do. Republican behavior, Republican activity in a legislative sense fuels inflation and fuels crime because they help guns proliferate. And then even if it's more legitimate owners getting access to semi-automatic weapons, more of those guns get stolen. More police become or at least begin to have a legitimate view to be in fear of their life when there are more guns on the street. And police officers kill multiple Americans each day, in part because of an overactive sense of vigilance about their personal safety that is fueled by the very real threat to their lives that is a function of having so many guns in people's hands, including in the hands of criminals who have taken the guns from law-abiding gun purchasers, law-abiding gun owners who have left guns improperly and secured in their cars, or who have had their homes broken into, who've had safes that were just easy to break into or remove. Republicans pander to gun profiteers who try and make all of that possible, try and create a world, a nation in which more police officers are in fear of their lives, more police officers die, more children die in accidents, more family members take their own lives or take each other's lives in moments of domestic conflict. The man there was a mass shooting of 8 people, and it was a man whose wife had filed for divorce in Utah. They were members of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They had 5 children together. Her mother had moved in with them to help them because there was marital problems. And a few days after the husband was served with divorce papers, he killed his 5 children. He killed his wife. He killed his wife's mother, and he killed himself. And the same crimes are possible with other weapons, but guns facilitate those things. They make the goal of killing your family members more achievable because you can do it more in a smaller time frame. You can do it without fear of somebody wrestling your weapon away from you as easily and running away from you. You can run away from somebody with a knife more easily than you can run away from someone with a gun. And that's why gun proliferation makes domestic violence death statistics go up. Christopher's back, and Sky News coverages stories of Mexican battles with the Sinaloa cartel. Oh, I haven't seen that covered at all. All right. So I'm grateful to that photographer for staying around. Oh, I did start to touch on Matthew Rosenberg, a reporter for the New York Times, who evidently met with someone concealing their identity, who's an employee of Project Veritas, probably an attractive woman, and Matthew Rosenberg was unburdening himself of all his resentments of his colleagues because he called them expletive bitches who whined about the trauma from their experience being in the Capitol on that day. So Matthew Rosenberg claimed to have been outside and he was just having fun and he didn't have any trauma, and he was disparaging his colleagues for continuing to claim that they felt trauma as a consequence of having been inside the Capitol on that day. So Project Veritas were using this footage, the secretly obtained footage, because secrets are often seductive, like secret knowledge. But you have to be pretty gullible to give any credence to this one man blowing off steam that he resents somebody from Gen X or Gen Z talking about their trauma. Because yes, we can be impatient and intolerant of other people describing their trauma from experiences we don't share. That doesn't mean January the 6th wasn't traumatic. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a huge deal that so many people sought to overthrow American democracy and install Trump as a despotic ruler for a second term he had not won through a legitimate electoral process. He lost the election, and the people who attacked the Capitol on January the 6th had known of that loss since November the 7th and were built up in a crescendo of misdirected rage and fury, cultivated carefully, assiduously by Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Kayleigh McEnany, and anyone and everyone who repeated Trump's lies, who pretended that there was evidence of fraud when there was no such thing. Trump is still trying to capitalize on people's racist predilections to believe the worst of someone if they're Black. So Ruby Freeman, the mother of Shay Moss. Shay Moss was worked as an election supervisor, I think, on a regular basis. Ruby Freeman was helping her daughter out, had volunteered to work on that day as well, and is still getting to be the subject of Trump's guilty diatribes on Truth Social, his Twitter rival platform, whose share price has fallen into the dirt because it's a rubbish company led by a rubbish seditionist traitor who is persecuting innocent American citizens and who should not just be sued. There should be some process available that stops him in a more efficient way. There should be some way of having the police go around to his house right now and saying, don't incite violence against Ruby Freeman. She had to close her business. She had to move house. And I'm sure those fears for her life have resurfaced in the most hideous way because of the last couple of days of activity on Trump's part, that he is once again putting Ruby Freeman's name in his mouth to spew violence inciting lies against her. When she was working, putting her own life at risk to work during a pandemic to help count votes. And the suitcases full of votes were not suitcases full of stolen votes. They were just transported votes, transported to count legitimate votes. There is no factory in China or in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. Where was Hugo Chavez from? Is he from Venezuela initially? Let's find out. But he's been dead for a while, but he was definitely the target of some of the Trump allies' disinformation strategies. Yes, he was president of Venezuela 1999 to 2002, and also from 2002 to 2013. So someone who didn't transfer power frequently. All right, I'm going to go and do other things. But what's my point for the day? Thank you to Leah Millis for her photography, for her efforts to capture what it was like that day, to help mitigate the Republican tendency to try and memory hole all of January the 6th, because it showcases the dysfunction, the violence, the fascism, because a characteristic of fascism is to incite violence for political gain, to lie to people so that they become enmeshed in such a frenzy of false belief that they will also act with a frenzy of violence towards their perceived foes. Those who can make you believe something can make you commit atrocities. Let's find the accurate quote. Absurdities. Is it Voltaire? Those who can make... Yes, it is Voltaire. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And that is what January the 6th was an exemplary demonstration of. People believing an absurdity that Trump had won the election, even though 60 court cases had been lost or thrown out of court because of lack of any actual evidence that there was fraud operating at any significant level. There was no significant fraud. There were just minor cases of people trying to vote for Trump twice. All of the cases of fraud from 2020 that I've seen so far have been Trump voters stealing their vote for their stealing a ballot or asking for a ballot on behalf of their dead wife and saying, well, she would have wanted to vote for Trump anyway or something. Or people from the Glades, from villages in Florida, voting at multiple locations for Trump. So normally people don't risk hefty fines and jail sentences for voter fraud, but people who can make you believe absurdities about Trump's so-called win made these people risk their freedom to try and vote for Trump twice. They probably just thought they were counteracting all of these people getting away with voting for Biden illegally. So they're like, it's not really illegal what I'm doing. It's just balancing out all of the illegality that Trump has assured me the other side are committing. I've noticed, because somebody pointed it out the other day, we often attach more to stories that have personality in them, as opposed to engaging with stories that are about systemic failures. So I think journalists probably often have to find stories about individual people. And that's very human of us, but it does mean shows about human drama like The Bachelor or reality TV are very capable of distracting us from the potent systemic issues of our time. The climate change, whereby air pollution is killing more people than traffic accidents each year. And we barely discuss it because it's not as attached to an individual person. There is not a one face. I'm attaching Trump's face to it because he withdrew America from the Paris Accord. He was sabotaging arrangements. But I can't say that just because Trump is out of office and Biden is in office that the problem is solved. There are still lots of ways in which the fossil fuel industry, executives in the fossil fuel industry, are paying for PR whizzes to try and rehabilitate the concept of fossil fuels to us, to try and help us ignore masses of subsidies being paid to fossil fuel industries, money that could be used to pay for subsidizing renewable energies, to help us move away from energy sources that provide us with energy short-term, long-term, cause people to die of air pollution related disease and cause people to suffer from all of the dislocation and trauma involved with unnatural disasters. So human activity exacerbated floods, human activity exacerbated fires, human activity exacerbated tornadoes and hurricanes, and all of the and bomb cyclones, and all of the extreme weather events. There's always been extreme weather events, but currently there is an element of unnecessary human catalyst, human catalyzing of weather extremes. They would not be this extreme had we not pumped in to the atmosphere so much gas that traps heat that comes from the sun, reverberates, bounces off the earth, and would pass back into space did we not have a layer of, an increasingly thick layer of gas that traps, that prevents some of that heat from escaping. So the more heat that we trap on Earth, the more the temperatures continue to rise over time, and the more likely it becomes that our children will find it increasingly difficult to survive. The more likely it becomes that humanity will be pushed to a precipice of collapse. The more likely it becomes that insurance companies can no longer insure homes or businesses. The more likely it becomes that wars escalate over. All right, Bob had a terrible time. As many gardeners report, your terrible time was not just with just your potatoes, but not just that crop. So your tomatoes and other crops as well. Yes, a lot of gardeners have reported changing growth patterns, changing pollination patterns, etc. Things are changing. And you can see with COVID that scientists understand that even something that looks like this on a graph, if it's doing this, it's still an exponential increase, even if it's not at this level yet. If it's going at this pattern, it means the curve is exponential and it will get here sooner than you want, sooner than you would have ever wanted. So COVID rose exponentially. And initially that meant nothing to people who couldn't see with their eyes evidence of it. And this is why you're supposed to listen to scientists, people, the kind of people who have a trained ability to look at graft data and say that pattern of rise is exponential. It's like human consciousness goes in cycles of anxiety. So at some point we become complacent and we say, everything's fine. I can't see anything bad. I have no recent memory of war or conflict. So I don't even believe that war or conflict will happen, or will happen to me or to those I love. And then we stop listening to scientists, and we stop listening to the kind of wise people who train their vision to look ahead into the future and not just at what is immediately gratifying or displeasing. And then we go into a war. We become sufficiently anti-intellectual that we despise the people who try and advocate for wise courses of action, even when those courses of action may be inconvenient or unpalatable. The kind of people who said Hitler's a problem and he should be stopped because he is growing exponentially more violent and acquisitive in his rhetoric. He wants to expand his empire. He's not just a loudmouth. It's a hard choice to make, but he should be dealt with. We have to push back against him now. And people would not. Snow. But the snow is still melting in the ground because the ground is wet from the rain. But the snowflakes are fun to watch fall down. Where Bob was last week's warm temperatures broke records by 7 degrees. Interesting. All right. Oh, I'm going to watch the baby before we go. This is who we are advocating. So beautiful. And there's a television on in the background with people making speeches for the speakers. So that's Representative Jimmy Cortez. Where does he represent? California, Los Angeles, District 34. And what a beautiful little baby he has. I cannot believe it. So beautiful. Oh, and the Republicans who are blocking the speaker vote are using it as a fundraising stunt. They're sending people emails. They're generating notoriety out of their famousness for blocking Kevin McCarthy's ascension to the position of speaker with their 20 holdout votes. I can imagine that would be true. In a post-Trump era, notoriety is a very valuable commodity to people who are still attached to absurd beliefs. They're still like, yeah, fight for us against the deep state. And Kevin McCarthy is a sellout because he pointed out that Trump was to blame for inciting violence on January the 6th. So he should be punished for that. They don't need reasonable evidence of anything anymore. They just want people to talk to them in a way that allows them to have enough noise in their head to drown out the idea that they were wrong about Trump, that they are gullible, that they are idiots ripe for exploitation by bad faith actors. They just need a steady stream of narrative that sounds plausible. They need people willing to talk the talk, to give them the plausible deniability they need to hide from the evidence of their own stupidity and their own actions that have caused harm to the United States, that have harmed their own community. They need noise to keep the voices in their head at bay. And they are giving money to Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert for providing them with that invaluable service of providing constant conflict for them to be up in arms about, because that is the kind of noise they need to avoid a quiet moment of reflection. They need constant conflict. And Trump isn't providing them with that anymore to the degree that they need, because he doesn't have Twitter. He's not in the news as much. They need notorious conflict. They need noisy conflict that's not so old it's ridiculous. Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert are generating fresh conflict. Trump hasn't refreshed his his conflict because he can't let go of it. He still can't admit to having lost the election, so he has to keep rehashing his old grievance. They need fresh grievance. It doesn't have to be very plausible. What is Matt Gaetz's actual grievance? Blah, 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 blah. They had some conditions for Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy met them, but they still want to have more grievance. It's good to know that their plot is not keep avoiding voting for Kevin McCarthy so that they can vote for Trump. They don't believe Trump can get in. They're changing who they vote for. It's Donald Trump. It's Stephen Scalise. Maybe it'll be Elise Stefanik next. Who knows? At the moment, they're just fundraising off it. It makes sense. I think I speculated yesterday that they maybe need a candidate who will be more proactive in committing to defunding the FBI and defunding the House Ethics Committee, defunding any organization that could bring accountability for those who have seditiously conspired against the United States. Well, thank you for listening to me today. Use this part about Trump and TikTok it. Voices in their heads. Thank you, Bob. I so appreciate you telling me which bits of my broadcast. This is a valuable service because I'm often like, what resonated the most? What would be worthy of condensing and making into a shorter video? I'll either do TikTok or a YouTube short video. Bless your heart, Bob. Thank you. Take care. And goodbye to anybody else watching as well. Thank you to any replay viewers. Take care. All the best. And see you hopefully tomorrow. Bye.